The US sends a 10-country-strong naval force to the Red Sea to counter the unprovoked attacks by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on merchant ships. The curious story of anti-Hamas youngsters getting snubbed by the United Nations. The Oberlin College professor with alleged Iranian ties. That and more here on Constable Confidential. I'm Simon Constable. First, we go to our intrepid correspondent, Ben Weinthal, who is with the Middle East Forum. He writes for them and for Fox News and other distinguished publications. He joins us from Jerusalem to tell us about his recent trip to the Gaza Strip. Thank you very much for joining us, Ben.
Thanks for having me on again, Simon.
Let's talk about going to Gaza, because I know that that's a big, big deal.
Right. Well, I've been working overtime to embed with the Israeli army in Gaza, and I've been on a waiting list for almost, I guess, 2 months. And I finally got a call on Thursday evening that I'll be allowed to go in with some other reporters from the New York Times and the BBC and CBS and some other outlets, the Times, excuse me, the Telegraph and the Financial Times, as well as some other outlets. But I was a reporter for Austria's largest paper, the Kronen Zeitung, the Kronen paper, because I write in German. So we had access to the largest Hamas terrorist tunnel that was discovered by the IDF recently. That's just outside of the crossing where Palestinians were allowed to enter Israel for medical help and work permits. So we went over into Gaza and went into this massive tunnel where you can drive cars through it. And they found RPGs and
That's
AK-47s in the tunnel.
rocket-propelled grenades, or bazookas, some people would call them. That's right. Is that what you mean there?
Correct. It's a massive tunnel that has various extensions. It's over 2 miles long. And as I said, it sort of splinters off into many other extended tunnels. The tunnel was not used on October 7th, the day of the massacre when Hamas invaded Israel, but it was in military readiness mode, the IDF told us. And the attack, of course, took above ground, but it was, I guess, a plan B if Hamas troops were decimated during the above ground attack at this entry point into Israel, so they didn't have to use the tunnel.
So when you went in these tunnels, what was your impression of it? Did it seem like a defeated Hamas when you went in there? What was your sort of idea of what was going on?
What the tunnel showed was the massive level of investment that Hamas injected into this underground city that they've built with the funds of Qatar, the Islamist regime in Doha, and I strongly suspect UN money that comes from Europe and the United States. So Hamas siphoned off all this type of public funds, but also funds from its main sponsor, Qatar, which is, in my view, um, has enabled terrorism based on reports, I should say. Um, and Instead, the IDF argues instead of building hospitals and schools, uh, Hamas spent years building this 400 meters long tunnel that burrows deep into the ground. So that's the scenario. It's filled with wires and oxygen pipes. When we entered, as we burrowed further into the tunnel, you're then covered in perspiration, and the air becomes quite clammy. So but at the same time, you can see how you can drive on an automobile through the tunnel. And I should note that the Sinwar brother, the Hamas terrorist leader, uh, that's the main terrorist family that's been leading this war, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of the main Hamas leader. was the one who built this tunnel. There's video now that the IDF released, Hamas video showing him driving in a small, or being driven in a small, what appears to be Jeep through this tunnel.
And did the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, give you any indication of what they were going to do with these tunnels? Were they just going to destroy them? You'd mentioned filling the tunnels up with seawater, which would quickly destroy pretty much anything. Is that still the same?
Well, this tunnel, I was told, will be blown up soon, so it may be decimated this week. We got the sense, the journalists who were there, that the destruction of this, the largest tunnel in Gaza, was imminent. The seawater issue is something I had heard about even before the Wall Street Journal reported on, but I couldn't verify it. But now it seems to be happening. The IDF has at least conducted one test, or maybe more than one test, where they've pumped seawater into this vast underground tunnel system, and with the view of trying to knock out whatever electronics exist in the tunnel system. The seawater probably would not go higher than the knees of an ordinary person. But at the same time, it's risky because the IDF does not want to, allow a tsunami wave to enter the tunnel system, because that could kill the hostages, most of whom I suspect are being held in this labyrinth of tunnels.
Let's move on to a story that you wrote for Fox Media, which is fascinating to me, and I really want to hear a lot about this. It's titled Young Generation of Anti-Hamas Activists in Gaza Step Up to Serve but Are Snubbed by the United Nations aid groups. What's going on here?
Yeah, I found this story quite fascinating when my editor contacted me and told me that there's a group of a small group, among the Palestinian population the Palestinian population is over 2.3 million, I believe, in the Gaza Strip. But there's a small group of young people, including one Palestinian youth leader. His name is Muman al-Natur. He's 28, and he's been leading a movement against, well, I should say a mini movement, or a mini protest is probably the better phrase, against Hamas rule since 2019. And he's been working to provide aid to the Palestinians right now during the war and before the war. But the UN and all of these organizations that are supposed to help the Palestinian population have snubbed him, and are in a de facto way deferring to Hamas rule. He's been arrested, al-Natur, 20 times, according to a human rights organization in Nazareth, and that's what he said as well.
And tortured, according to your piece, which is absolutely horrific.
Correct. And he led a big protest in 2019 that was violently crushed against Hamas. It was a protest against deteriorating economic conditions, and I suspect widespread corruption among Hamas rulers, as we see there. They've absorbed so much of the aid, whether it's concrete, oxygen for hospitals that they've used for their terror tunnels, and other goods for the aims of their terrorist movement, instead of devoting it to the population. So this protest in 2019 was crushed by Hamas. But so you have some rare voices in the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip that are against Hamas. Whether the UN and Western leaders are willing to cultivate this type of new leadership is still an open question. Certainly the UN has not, in any way, shape, or form, helped these struggling voices.
One of the interesting quotes here, and I'll read it from him, is, quote, on the military level, Hamas does not have even 2 or 3% of the strength Israel has. And then he says, it's important that those who suffered for 17 years are the ones who should be leading for the future of Gaza. We represent the youth, the disenfranchised. Quote, we do not need donors to govern us. What does he mean? Well, we do not need donors to govern us.
Well, my read of what he said during that um, question and answer period was he doesn't want all these relief organizations to exercise control or partial control over civilian society in a post Hamas society, and he doesn't want even pre before the eventual, I guess, dissolution of Hamas. Um, he doesn't want the Palestinian population to remain contingent on external forces, whether it be the Qatari regime or other aid agencies. It's a question of pure self determination for the Palestinian population. And as I reported in the article or during my interview, he advocates a two-state solution, namely a Palestinian state that would coexist with Israel.
And it's notable that standing on his own 2 feet or wanting Gaza to stand on its own 2 feet is a remarkably American situation, not wanting to live off handouts from anyone and also not wanting the influence as well. Now we turn to the professor at Oberlin College who allegedly has ties to Iran or bad ties to Iran, and he's now on administrative leave. And you have written about that, and that work that you wrote again for Fox News has been picked up by the US government. Explain what's happened here.
Well, I've been reporting on Mohammed Jafar Mahalati for 3 years since Iranian Americans and Iranians around the globe in the diaspora urged that Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, fire Mahalati because he covered up the mass murder of 5,000 Iranian political prisoners in 1988 when he served as the Iranian regime's ambassador to the UN. And it seemed the college reached its Oberlin College reached its breaking point last month and placed Mahalati on leave. And the sense is when I try to extract information about what led to him being ousted, that is Mahalati, there's been a series of events. One is obviously that Amnesty International has accused him in two reports of uh, covering up crimes against humanity. That's the phrase they use. Um, he endorsed a fatwa against the British American writer Solomon Rushdie when he was ambassador. He called for a global jihad against Israel and urged the elimination of the Jewish state. He also laid the ideological foundation to wipe out the persecuted Baha'i group in Iran when he was ambassador. And lastly, there was a recent revelation that he sexually harassed a young student of his at Columbia University in the late 1990s. So that cumulative effect is what might have, in the end, sparked Oberlin College to strip him of his academic post. But it's unclear. They won't tell me when I asked them on the phone, that is the spokesman for Oberlin, what was the reason, and all the college is saying. The only thing the college is saying at this point, we put him on uh, administrative leave on November 28th.
Yeah, and that spokesman is also at the end of the story here. Quote, we learned of the lawsuit filed by the Southern District of New York against him from a media inquiry sent to us on December the 5th. We would not hire a faculty member whom we knew had a history of sexual assault, harassment, or abuse of anyone, including a student, colleague, or a staff member. But what you listed earlier was such a long list of infractions against human rights in some cases that you would think any one of those would have had him, be in the ejector seat. Really, it is kind of puzzling why it took them so long.
Yes, Simon, you zoomed in on the sort of 800-pound gorilla question in the room that everyone or many folks are asking, at least who have followed this Mahalati story in a granular way, because he's the highest ranking former Iranian regime official serving or working in the U.S. and he has American citizenship. But why would Oberlin not dismiss him in light of all the what his critics say is overwhelming evidence from the national and international human rights lawyers that he went to great lengths to cover up a massacre of 5,000 people in 1988. They did not object to that, Oberlin College. In fact, they issued a report whitewashing his crimes, and then they scrubbed that report from their website, Oberlin College's website, once the story started to break about uh, charges of anti-Semitism against him and other, and I perhaps there's some connection to the sexual harassment. So they won't. Oberlin College simply won't explain what you just zoomed in on. And by the way, Shireen Ebadi, the Iranian Nobel Peace Prize winner, also said Oberlin College whitewashed its investigation against Mahalati by clearing him of those crimes against humanity. But Oberlin stuck with him until last month.
And that is quite interesting, because what I know about human rights lawyers is that there's quite a high hurdle to get over before they show up and start saying, look, this is a problem, this is what's happened. And yet there he was, having allegedly done this and committed these massacres.
Yeah, and
And
the
and so, I mean, it's not like getting picked up for a parking ticket that you may or may not deserve. This is quite a high hurdle when the human rights lawyers show up.
correct, and Mahalati uh, had the nickname, I guess, of Professor of Peace within the Oberlin College community for over a decade, I believe. So he sported this name, the Professor of Peace, but at the same time, he again, according to all these experts and Amnesty International, um, committed war crimes / crimes against humanity. And this is, by the way, one of the most liberal, so-called, putting this in scary quotes, woke colleges in the United States, Oberlin College. Yet the management of the college did not object for years to the fact that he played a critical role in covering up this massacre.
We'll see what happens next with that. Let's now turn to the US announcing a 10-nation force, naval force, basically, to help save merchant shipping around the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea is what happens after the Suez Canal, which takes big ships from the Mediterranean right through to what becomes the Indian Ocean. So that's a critical place to move oil through, and we've seen oil prices go up. Price of Brent crude went up considerably over the last week or so. What do you think this naval task force, if you want to call it that, will do to help?
Well, I talked today. It's an interesting question. I talked today to one Israeli, former Israeli intelligence official for the military intelligence here, who served as an advisor, counterterrorism advisor to Israeli Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Shamir. His name is Yigal Kramon. And he said the alliance, and I thought that was an interesting take, is mainly um, an American endeavor. That is, there's an alliance, but at the end of the day, the Americans will use their massive warships to strike the Houthis, the Iranian-backed terrorist movement that's based in Yemen, to counter their terrorism and piracy in that region. I should note that the Houthis, their slogan is, and I think this is quite important, is Allah is greater, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews. This is the same group that the Biden administration, at the start of his presidency, delisted as a terrorist organization. The Trump administration designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization, and Biden delisted them. And you can see right now what they've done because there's been, according to many experts, no deterrence against them. So the big question is, will this alliance deter the Houthis and Iran, their main proxy or a strategic partner?
And it's going to be very interesting to see that. One of the things that I have been told, and my understanding is that the Houthis are launching cruise missiles from well inside Yemen. So they're not in little boats firing them at vessels on the Red Sea or anywhere near. It's a long way inside the country. Is that something that the Navy can do to, can counter with its own cruise missiles straight back at that, or is that just a waste of time? It would seem to me trying to find people in the desert would be quite tricky.
Well, uh, the American military has a spectacular level of air power, and they're bringing warships into that region, so they could use fighter jets, and they have the most forward looking military base in Qatar of all places, CENTCOM. So there clearly is the ability based on intelligence to track where these cruise missiles are coming from in Yemen and destroy the infrastructure as well as target the terrorists. I mean, so I wouldn't rule it out. The other problem though is the Iranian regime is providing all of this military technology to the Houthis to use against America and its allies, but the Americans have not really uh, countered Iran's jingoism in the region. There's been over 100 military strikes against American assets in the Middle East that are blamed on Iranian-backed militias. So the sort of the head of is Iran. That's what Iranians say. The Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah. The head of the snake of all this troika of terrorists that I just outlined is Iran. The question is, will America ratchet up its military power to stop Iran's financing and sponsorship of these terrorist organizations?
One thing we do know about the Houthis is that they were waging a proxy war against Saudi Arabia until quite recently. Do you think Saudi Arabia will step up and try and fight the Houthis from the other side, the other physical side of Yemen, where they're based?
Depends on what the Americans want. I mean, the problem is America has recoiled in many ways from the Middle East, and the Saudis see what they view as a very feeble and almost incurably weak American foreign policy in that part of the world in its back door, namely, and that's why Saudi Arabia shifted toward China and other world powers as opposed to the U.S. The U.S. is willing to flex its military muscle in the region and work to root out the Houthis' movement in Yemen. Then they might be able to persuade the Saudis to join into align themselves and engage in combat. But the Americans, if you remember, forced the Saudis to stop fighting the Houthis in Yemen recently. So it's a very bizarre situation.
It is indeed a very bizarre situation, and we'll look forward to your future reports on that. Thank you very much. Ben Weinthal in Jerusalem, who writes for the Middle East Forum, Fox News Media, and other distinguished publications. I'm Simon Constable. This is Constable Confidential. That's it.